Hello, Jason Moore here at Guitar Solo Dojo. So I just recently did a video, recently as in today, and talked about the major scale and how to turn that into Lydian and Mixolydian and things like that. And I got talking to my good buddy Jeff, and we were wondering, and he was wondering about, well, how can we actually implement that, okay? There's a couple examples that immediately came to mind, and not necessarily using Lydian as the scale, but using the idea of Lydian, and that being that Lydian and major have a very distinct difference, and that's just the fourth note, okay? So if I were to take a major scale and put it right next to Lydian, right over the top of Lydian, the only discernible difference is that fourth note. So the Lydian has the fourth note, which is sharp compared to a major scale. And so that means by a real basic harmony, and this is where things get funky because people don't follow the rules all the time, and the rules aren't there necessarily to be followed. The rules are there so you can know them, so you can hopefully know how to break them very creatively. But that being said, it's always nice to have your feet firmly planted somewhere so you know what the rules are at least, so you can toy around with it. It's better that way. And then you can do whatever you want with it. So a couple examples immediately came to mind of utilizing that sharp fourth note. And for those of you who don't know, if I'm playing a basic chord progression, say a 1-4-5 chord progression, this doesn't line out like people do this all the time, but the idea is if I'm playing over the one chord, I'm essentially playing over the root note of the major scale, okay? And if I'm playing over the four chord, that four chord is derived from the harmony that I would get starting from the fourth note of the major scale, which that fourth note is the beginning of Lydian, okay? Major with a sharp four, essentially. And if I play over the five chord, that harmony is derived from the notes I would get out of Mixolydian, which starts at the fifth note of the major scale. So it's very easy to follow in that sense in terms of like how are those chords derived, and how do we get like a dominant 7 out of the 5 chord or a sharp 4 out of the 4 chord. That's how it's done. And once again, that's just the basic. We're not saying you have to do that or anything like that, but there are a lot of good examples and how that can actually play out, and some in rock music, lots in jazz, tons in jazz. But the two immediately that stuck out of my mind were that riff and Round and Round. And that intro riff, super, super cool. When you break this down and you take away the very first chord in it, which is an E major. So I got that E major chord right there. And so instantly we're thrown off in the beginning, but right away it jumps to an E minor. Okay, so that's something really cool you got going on. Right to the E minor. And then I'm not going to play the whole riff at this point, but it drops down to a D now, and then down to a C. Okay, that's the basic harmony of this. If you know that at all, when you see these two major chords together, it just screams 4-5 chord progression, which totally makes sense because this song is in the key of E minor, essentially, which is the key of G major, the relative to the key of G major. And if I look at the key of G major, a 1-4-5 would be G, C, and D. Okay, so the C and the D are the 4 and the 5, and that E minor is the 6. Of course, those numbers get changed when we turn out to call it the key of E minor, because this suddenly would be the 1 chord, but we don't need to get into that. The idea, though, is that it's essentially a 6-5-4 chord progression, which you will have seen a lot in rock music. Most famous example will be, of course, Stairway to Heaven, that sort of outro bit, that 6-5-4, used a lot. Okay, in this case, he really utilizes the elements of modes and how they would fit over those chords very, very well. So we've got this cool E major start to start, right to that E minor. And I think it's two guitars, so I'm playing probably a composite arrangement of what's going on. So I don't think either guitarist is doing exactly what I'm doing, but this is the idea. So we got our E major, right to the minor. A little suspension on the 5 chord, so a sus4, and then we get to this sus4, which it looks different than the other sus4. Why is that? It's because it's over the 4 chord, and 3 to 4 is a whole step. So that's where we get our sharp 4. Hits it again. ending with another sus4 over that major 6 again. So anyway, that's the idea. That's one really, really cool example that stands out. Another one that stands out is on Feel Your Love Tonight, Van Halen. Basic tonality in that song, if you look at it, you look at the solo, you look at the main riff, it's kind of an E minor thing. Same idea is round and round, key-wise, and when he goes to this bridge part, right, we get that really cool thing. And so it's the same chord because it's the same key, but he's hitting a C, and he also does that sharp 4. Now, I don't know if he was thinking in terms, oh, I have to hit the sharp 4 because it's over the 4 chord. Probably not. Maybe he just thought it sounded cool. I'm sure he was aware of it. But the idea is that's what gives it that little bit of edge. Because if we play that sus4 like any other sus4 beat, and Eddie used those a lot, we can go on and on about all the different times he uses a sus4, but this sharp 4 was beautifully put because it's right over that 4 chord, and harmonically it made perfect sense. And even if it didn't make harmonic sense, it still sounds cool. So anyway, there's a couple good examples of that sharp 4 and how it can interplay with the idea of the major scale, Lydian, and chord progressions, and all that fun stuff. So enjoy.